Hi, and welcome to my speed build. Today I'm building a pumpkin farm using the Businesses and Hobbies pack. I'm building this on the 64 by 64 lot called Red Roan Field in the World Chestnut Ridge from the Horse Ranch pack. This lot has quite a few sections: a pumpkin patch out front, a big red barn where you can sell the pumpkins, a cozy cafe on the second floor, and then behind that there's a small area for two horses, a chicken coop, and two cottage living barns where you could add a cow or a llama. There's also a large farmhouse with a traditional wraparound porch, a backyard swimming pool, and a small apple orchard behind the pool. So the first thing I built on this lot was the barn. I knew I wanted a classic red barn with white trim, but I also needed a second floor for the cafe, and this was the type of barn that worked best for that. So, before I settled on the barn you see me building now, I actually started with a totally different style, which you can see off to the left. I was trying out one of those big barns that you usually see on older properties, but once I started planning the cafe layout upstairs, it just wasn't cooperating with what I had in mind. I ended up scrapping it and starting fresh with the more straightforward barn shape I'm using now. I also went through quite a few different windows. Especially for the front of the barn, most of the windows looked too residential. I eventually went with the tall windows from Cats and Dogs pack because I liked that they looked like hayloft doors that I've seen on actual barns. And here's a little time jump into the finished pumpkin patch. I cut most of this out because it was very repetitive and tedious to place and adjust everything, not very interesting to look at. And I didn't actually have a sim grow all these pumpkins for this build. I have some pumpkins saved to my gallery. I uploaded them as small separate rooms. Each room is just a few pumpkins of the same color. So if you need pumpkins for your build, you can visit my gallery and download exactly the color set you want and place them however you like. Now I've moved on to the barn interior. The ground floor is the retail space where all the pumpkins are sold, and the second floor is the cafe, which we'll get to in a moment. Right now, I'm laying down the flooring and figuring out the structure for the upstairs. For the second floor, I wanted it to feel open and airy, where you can look down into the barn below and watch the Sims carve pumpkins. To me, this lofted open feeling just fits with how barns are typically laid out. I'm not an expert on barns by any means, but usually there's some kind of upper loft level that's open to the main space, so I wanted to echo that here. And for this bathroom, I leaned into a clean, slightly modern farmhouse look. The pattern tile gives it a bit of charm, and the white tile keeps the space bright and easy. I also added a little enclosed stall for the toilet so that if another sim walks in, it won't cause negative moodlets. And here's the start of the pumpkin carving station. If you wanted, you could sell the pumpkins that Sims carve, and if you have the Seasons pack, I'm pretty sure you can make pumpkin carving one of the activities when Sims visit your business. For the cafe, I set up a little music corner where your Sims can play the piano, sing, or use the guitar, either just for fun or to entertain other Sims. And you can assign those as activities as well as ordering cafe drinks to the retail space. There are two types of seating: a row of tables and chairs overlooking the shop downstairs, and a cozy lounge area with a sofa, two armchairs, and a coffee table. And that weird blue bar cutting across the wall upstairs, that's a roof glitch. Hopefully you won't experience it in your game. There was a big bug fix patch in early November, so fingers crossed that glitch is gone if you do decide to download this build. A little landscaping tip while we're here. Whenever I use stone or gravel paths, I almost always put down a layer of dirt terrain paint first. In my mind, it makes everything look more realistic if the dirt peeks through. By changing the opacity of your terrain brush for the stone paths, you can let it show along the edges or in high traffic areas where the ground might be worn down. It gives the gravel more depth and makes paths feel used rather than perfectly pristine. Okay, so out in the back of the barn here, I'm adding a fire pit, vending machines, trash cans, and picnic tables. This is an extra area where Sims can gather to watch the farm animals, have a snack, or sit together on a bench in front of the fire. And up on the barn wall, I added these great string lights that came with businesses and hobbies. They look really cute, but they are extremely fussy to place. Each strand is a separate piece, so it's a little tedious to switch between the different shapes. Each string is in its own listing in the build menu, but I think each shape should have been swatches. It would be so much easier to build with that and take up less space in the menu, too. Inside the barn, I cut out the whole process of stocking the store. That might seem strange since the build is centered on the pumpkin shop, but that was literally 30 minutes of me placing pumpkins on shelves, not the most thrilling footage. If you've never built a business lot before, here's how it works. You can only mark items for sale if they're placed on specific sellable surfaces that come from the businesses packs. To my knowledge, that's mainly items from businesses and hobbies and Get to Work. The tall shelves that the pumpkins are sitting on are from Get to Work, and the display shelves with the jack-o'-lanterns are from businesses and hobbies. The key is that items have to snap into those slots. You can't alt place them if you want them to be sellable. Alt placement breaks the link and then Sims can't buy them. Anything on the walls also can't be marked for sale. So, if there's a specific item you want to sell, make sure it's on one of those proper retail shelves or tables. The little clutter pieces I layered around the pumpkins, things on the floor or wedged in at odd angles, are just decorative. But what you can do once something sells is grab one of the decorative items that isn't snapped into a slot and move it into that empty space. And once it's placed properly, you can mark it for sale. For the decor of the barn, I was thinking about the farm shops that I've been to over the years. They're always a little eclectic and crammed with character, posters covering the walls, old signage, produce branding, little seasonal crafts, wine bottles from local vineyards, all of that. We don't have a lot of specific produce branding posters in game, so I used a bunch of decals and signs to mimic that feeling. Seasons was especially helpful here. Almost all of the decals and pumpkin signs came from that pack, and they really helped the barn feel more authentically like a family store that's been around for generations. And now I'm going back through the barn and adjusting a lot of the wall art to try to balance things out and make sure I'm using a decent variety of items. There's a lot of good items to pick from, like garlands and strings of holiday greeting cards and autumn-themed decals. I also put hay bales around the shop to add to the farm atmosphere. These particular ones are actually seats your Sims can sit on, but you can find other versions of it in the debug menu. I even added decals to the outside of the barn to make it look like it's got some hand-painted art on it. And for the cafe, I found a poster of a barn that looks just like the barn I built. That was a fun surprise to find in the build menu. The cafe counters that came with businesses and hobbies is my new favorite to use. I love the colors and the details. And then I remembered that we have these holiday wreaths, so I replaced some of the woven wall art with the seasonal wreaths instead. On the outside of the barn here, I added a small bench facing what I imagine is a horse training area of some kind. I like the idea of Sims grabbing a snack or a drink from the cafe or the vending machines and then wandering out here and sitting down to watch the horses while they eat. It just feels like one of those little moments that would make visiting a farm really charming. I added a lot of sunflowers around the barn too. They're such a classic farm detail and the color brings so much warmth to the outside of the building. And they size up beautifully, so you can make them pretty tall if you want a bolder look, and I love using the single sunflower as a filler plant because it helps blend it together without feeling too uniform. And then I went in with more string lights. They're definitely a bit tedious to place, but I think they're worth it for the atmosphere they add, especially in a barn setting like this. It gives the whole area a really cozy glow at night. Back to the barn exterior walls, I'm adding some finishing touches because I wasn't happy with the roof trim. I couldn't find a trim that matched the width of the white bar detail on the red siding. So, instead, I used curtain rods from one of the desert-themed kits and lined them up along the edges to mimic a thick white board. And then I also added gutters and some white climbing flowers. A landscaping trick I like is using darker terrain paint under gutters, sprinklers, and other water features to mimic water stains or damp soil. It gives the landscaping just a little more depth and realism. We're jumping ahead again because the parking lot took a lot of extra work and debug hunting to find what I needed. Everything is debugged for the parking area, both the public lot and the covered carport for the family. I was even able to find parking signs for the lot and a do not enter sign for the entrance to the family's home. My favorite part about this is that I was able to find the farm truck with a company logo on it. And then back near the entrance of the pumpkin farm, I realized the check-in kiosk should probably be under some kind of cover if you're playing with seasons, so I added a pergola-style structure over it and placed an open-closed sandwich sign next to it. And now we're moving into the back section for the horses and other livestock. I built a barn large enough for 2 horse stalls, added some barrels for training and a ball for enrichment, plus a chicken coop and 2 cottage living animal barns. These smaller barns can house a cow or a llama, and this area here only has 1 chicken coop, but there's definitely plenty of room if you would like to add more. And you can probably add another cottage living barn too if you like. For the exterior of the stables, I went with slightly weathered wood pattern and paired it with dark wooden doors to give it that classic farm feel. A few simple details like the planter barrels by the entrance, the hand-painted sign, and the trees in the corners help it feel realistic and lived in. I think it's a nice little corner of the farm where the animals have room to eat, wander, play, and greet visitors. For the flooring inside the horse stables, I did a little bit of light research, just enough to make it feel somewhat realistic. From what I read, some barns use special concrete that's better for hooves, then layer hay over top for comfort and grip. So I used a concrete-looking tile for the main floor and then added hay around the feeding troughs as if it's been spread around where the horses stand the most. Around the barn, I used traditional brick to age the space a bit, then added details like horseshoe wall art, bales of hay, cleaning tools, and even a small sitting area. I added ceiling fans for air circulation, more cleaning supplies, and banners over the stalls. Outside, I added more to the landscaping, barrel planters, and worn pathways using a mix of dirt and textured terrain to make it look like animals are walking around and the space is lived in. And here we are. We're finally moving on to the farmhouse. I had a pretty clear idea, a white farmhouse with black shutters and a wraparound porch. I looked up reference photos to refine the shape and figure out how big I wanted it and where the bump outs should go and how far the porch should wrap. This house turned out fairly large. It has 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, and a home office. And if you wanted to, you could swap out the home office for another bedroom. And in a moment, you'll see me adding the wraparound porch, and I was pretty indecisive with exactly how to place the porch, but eventually I figured out what I wanted, and that's what you see me build here. In the reference pictures I found, most of these types of farmhouses didn't have porch railings at all. It was just open. And that looks beautiful in real life, but in The Sims it can read a little unfinished. So I eventually added a simple fence around the porch to make it feel more complete in-game. And I spend a lot of time here adjusting the windows and the roof height, just trying to get the game to cooperate. With this style of house, the windows and the roofline have to be placed carefully or they start clipping, floating, or looking a little off, so I kept moving them around until everything sat correctly. The roof itself took a few tries too, changing the height, tweaking the angles, and reshaping it so it wouldn't cut through the windows. and the curved section of the roof was a little tricky. I had to redo it a couple times before it finally matched the shape I had in mind without causing any weird shadows or overlaps. It was one of those classic sim moments where you keep nudging things around until the whole exterior finally settles into place. Now onto the inside, where I start by carving out the room layout. When I build larger, older style homes, I usually follow a more traditional floor plan rather than an open concept. Historically, formal houses almost always had a foyer. Guests wouldn't walk straight into the living space. There'd be a small entrance hall where you'd greet them, take coats, and then lead them into a more public room. From the foyer, guests would typically be brought into either a parlor, which is a formal living room, or the formal dining room. And in this house, I originally meant for them to walk directly into the dining room from the foyer, so you'll see me get a bit turned around here. I accidentally put the door on the wrong side of the kitchen and started decorating as if the living room were the first room off the foyer. And as you can see, I don't realize my mistake for a while, and you'll see that flip later on. And in a traditional floor plan, the kitchen should connect directly to the dining room and usually through a door and not an open arch. In older homes, especially wealthier ones, you wouldn't want kitchen smells or the sight of cooking and dishes to be visible to guests. And if there were staff, the door also created a boundary between the front of the house and the back of the house. So I do that here. The kitchen opens into the dining room with a proper door for easy meal service. And for the kitchen, I wanted it to feel inviting and lived in, so I used the blue cabinets and the white brick to keep things bright and homey. The open shelves and clutter make it feel like a space that's used every day, and the patterned floor tiles give the whole room a nice bit of charm. And that table in the nook is a game table, but you can also use it as a breakfast table. And this is the part where I'm trying to make the living room furniture fit, totally forgetting this was meant to be the dining room. So, of course, nothing fits, and I'm just moving things around and wondering why it's not working. And here's the cut to when I put the living room in the right space. The living room turned into a really comfortable area with a mix of neutral tones and soft blues. I centered everything around the fireplace to make it feel cozy, and the artwork above it is actually the TV. I also ended up moving the staircase into this room instead of the dining room, and it gives the space a much better flow. The full wall of bookshelves adds that lived-in, well-loved feeling, and the plants, simple artwork, and the quilt by the window help tie in the farmhouse look. Overall, I wanted this to feel calm and really inviting. Also, another detail, if you want your house to feel older, think about where the stairs are. Traditionally, staircases were placed right in the front hall of older wealthy homes. It wasn't seen as a private moment back then, and also let the family show off a bit as a decorative focal point when guests arrived. Over time, as everyday life became more casual, staircases moved into quieter areas so the front entry could stay more formal and the private family spaces stayed separate. So, if you want to build an older, more formal house, you could make the staircase a big feature in the front, or if you want a more casual build, tuck it into a family room. And now I'm adding a small bathroom off the foyer. I use the same wall and floor tiles as the kitchen to keep things cohesive. In a real home, this would be the guest bathroom, easy to find and close to the entrance. Typically, a bathroom off a foyer wouldn't necessarily have a shower, but it'll be useful for gameplay so your Sims don't always have to go upstairs to use one. And here's where I start going back and forth with the colors in the foyer. Between the brown door and the white trim, I couldn't decide which color to go with. I kept switching back and forth, trying to see whether it made more sense to use the dark wood or keep everything bright. But I kept changing my mind because the dark wood swatches didn't really seem to go with each other. Eventually, I ended up going with white for the furniture. It felt like that suited the room better because the swatches were more uniform. Next is the home office. Since this is a family-run business, I imagine they need a space to handle paperwork, vendors, scheduling, and everything else that keeps the farm organized. It's not a huge room, but I wanted it to feel comfortable and functional. I kept it practical but still homey with a sturdy desk, lots of bookshelves, and a few plants to add some warmth and keep the space from feeling too heavy. The artwork and certificates on the wall make it feel like a realistic office with a collection of things that accumulated over the years. Also, I didn't create any designated employee spaces in the barn, so this office could easily be their main spot. But if you prefer the employee spaces to be in the barn, you can definitely renovate it and add an employee room or two. And if you don't need a home office, this room can easily become something else. It could be a spare bedroom, especially if you want an extra space for guests or a growing household. And now we moved on to the second floor. As I was editing the video, I realized how much I love the color palette I ended up with: tans, creams, light blues, and soft greens. It's one of my personal favorite combinations. Then it hit me that this is a pumpkin farm and I barely used any orange inside the house. I was so focused on building a classic farmhouse that's been updated over generations that I didn't really theme the interiors around pumpkins. In my mind, this is a family home that's been here for decades, maybe longer, and as the farm's income grew, they renovated it room by room rather than gutting everything all at once. And the primary bathroom is a good example of that. It's large, about the same size as the bedroom across the hall from it, so I imagined this space used to be another bedroom. As time went on and the family gained more money, they converted it into a modern bathroom. That's why it's so crisp and updated compared to other parts of the house. And I tend to keep all my bathrooms consistent in my builds: same tile, same flooring, similar fixtures. I just think that's realistic, as most people don't mix all different floor types in one house. You can, of course, but I like the cohesiveness of repeating things. Now I'm working on the toddler's room. I wanted it to feel playful and colorful with some pattern mixing. If you're nervous about mixing patterns, here's the simple approach I use. Choose a clear color palette and stick to it. For this room, it's pink, blue, and cream. Everything is different, but the colors connect it all. Mix pattern types. I usually pair one or more geometric pattern with one or more organic or floral pattern. In this room, the geometric is the diamond pattern and the organic is the floral pattern on the dresser. Use at least one calmer or more neutral pattern like the rug here. The rug has a softer palette and not too much visual noise, which helps all the bolder patterns still feel cohesive. Those aren't hard rules, but they help keep pattern mixing from looking chaotic, especially in kids' rooms where there is already a lot happening. Next is the primary bedroom. As soon as I saw this bed, I knew I wanted the entire room to follow its color story: soft sage greens and muted tones. And I used two newer rugs. The green one is from a modern living room kit, and the tasseled rug is from a recent base game update. The bedside lamps are also from that update, and I love every swatch. I added a small reading nook with a side table and two different armchairs, and the artwork over the bed is mostly chosen for color rather than subject matter. Ideally, I would have wanted watercolor nature scenes, but since we don't have exactly that in-game, I leaned on pieces that at least matched the color palette. The next bedroom has a slightly different feel. It leans more into dark wood and dusty blue tones, so it feels a little more traditional and farmhouse-like compared to the more modern primary bedroom. I really like the furniture combinations in here. This room feels like it belongs to somebody who's maybe older or who likes a more classic farmhouse style. And just like the primary bedroom, it also has a fireplace. And the last bedroom is a children's room that's big enough for 2 kids. I used lots of blue for this room and focused on good gameplay items: toys, activities, and comfort. The stuffed cat is one of my favorite kids' toys in the game, so of course it had to go in here. I also discovered some horse-themed items I didn't realize we had, which fit perfectly for a farmhouse that's in Chestnut Ridge. Finding wall art in the right colors was surprisingly tricky. You'll see me rearranging things and shuffling artwork around until the room feels balanced and not too busy. And I moved the craft table to the corner to make a better path through the room, and all the items here should be accessible by Sims. And once I had the artwork arranged in a way that I liked, I realized that the room could use a little bit more light, so I added 2 sconces to the wall. Now we're back outside. I'm starting to wrap up with decorating the front porch, the back deck, the pool area, and the landscaping around the house. I'm not showing every single detail because there is a lot of it, but you'll get the general idea. On the front porch, I keep things fairly symmetrical. Simple plants with matching green shades and benches for Sims to sit on. I really like the olive tree from one of the newer bathroom kits. I love the leaves, and it comes in a lot of really nice swatches. It might be an indoor plant, but I love to put it by front doors. The barrel planter from Dine Out is another favorite. It fits the farmhouse theme perfectly, so I placed several of them around the front porch. One thing I love doing on balconies and decks is using the trellis from Eco Lifestyle. I raise it up to create a sort of frame or partial screen, and I use that a lot on apartment balconies too. It's a nice way to add a sense of privacy while still letting light through and keeping things visually interesting. And these rocking chairs feel especially farmhouse to me. They have a classic style with pillows that look handcrafted that I always associate with these big wraparound porches. I added a little tray with lemonade for more gameplay options as well, and I also brought in lots of plants and climbing vines to soften the edges and make the porch feel more connected to the landscaping. Overall, the back porch took me a while to figure out. I knew I wanted it to feel like a classic farmhouse porch, the kind that wraps around the back of the house and has different areas. For this porch, I ended up building spots for seating, eating a meal, or playing chess. Decide to download this build, you could also add planters to grow your own plants on the porch. Also, that aloe plant next to the bench is from the same base game update as the rugs and the lamps, another new favorite of mine. And that dining table and chairs is a reward from an in-game event earlier this year. And I did look at reference photos to help me decide the layout of this porch, but it was not easy to replicate what I was seeing. So there was definitely some trial and error while I figured out what worked with the items I actually have in-game. I rearranged the seating areas a few times, adjusted the rugs, and swapped out chairs, just trying to get the right balance between cozy and functional without overcrowding the space. Eventually, I landed on a layout that feels really inviting, a full outdoor dining area on one side for bigger gatherings, then a smaller conversation area with rocking chairs on the other, and then behind that, a chess table. Whenever I'm building a large porch like this, I like to break it down into smaller zones so each area has its own purpose and it doesn't feel too empty. It helps keep the space visually interesting and offers quite a few things for your Sims to do. Now we've moved on to the swimming pool. I tried a few different fences, flooring, and pool trims until I got a combination that I liked. I moved the fencing around to find the best balance between the pool area and the rest of the yard, and I didn't want it too close to the horse stables either. And you'll see some of that process here, but most of it I cut out for the sake of time. And I made some edits after I stopped recording, but you can see the final version in the slideshow at the end of this video. And I wanted the deck around the pool to have enough space for furniture, lounge chairs, and a dining set. And you could probably fit a grill too, but I skipped that. And I really like the diving board from the Adventure Awaits pack, so I had to add that as well. For pool lighting, I place them by dropping down to the underground level and then hit the T key to get that top-down angle. It makes it so much easier to see where you're putting the lights. And I really overdid it with the lighting at first and then deleted a bunch to get it to a more reasonable brightness. And I also like to add the dirt wallpaper around the pool instead of leaving it just the default drywall. And for the lounge chairs, I wanted something that would go with a farmhouse vibe, maybe with wooden or natural fibers. I found a few that I liked, but I ended up choosing the ones from the Riviera kit. It's a really nice kit and comes with some fun items, and the colors are perfect for this build. At one point, I forgot to use the matching end table, so I had to switch that out for the right one. Also, one of my favorite pool details is the pool net and life preserver wall item that comes with the Get Together pack. It really helps add a bit of realism to pools in the game. So once I placed the umbrella, I noticed that the shadow fell behind the chairs and not over them, so I ended up flipping the layout. At first, I tried moving the chairs around to see if that would work, but in the end, I did have to move them to the other side of the pool. It wasn't too tedious. I just moved the pool up, repositioned the ladders and diving board, and it was worth it to have the umbrella shadow actually fall over the lounge chairs. So, to finish up the pool area, I added the outdoor dining set and the little poolside towel table, both from the Riviera kit. And actually, the lemonade tray is also from the kit, and it's such a cute detail to keep by the poolside. And now we've made it to the final section, the landscaping. I use a majority of debug plants here. I like the variety and the color choices a little better than the regular build by menu. And when I have a tall foundation like this one, I love using cypress trees from debug, and I resize them to fit next to the stairs. They have a nice vertical shape and are easy to layer other plants around. And hydrangeas are a staple for me. They're classic and perfect for a farmhouse, so they're the main flowering shrub for this build. I also use debug plants from Eco Lifestyle, like the white lavender and the tall green leafy plants. They're great for subtle color without being too bright. The muted green low-lying bushes from Horse Ranch Debug are another favorite. They're a more natural desaturated green compared to things like the low-lying daisies, which to me are a little bit too bright. I used to rely on those daisies all the time, but now I prefer the debug shrubs for a more realistic look. And for foundations, I really like the pattern to show through in most of my builds, so I prefer to use the tall grass plants instead of the heavy, thick shrubs when I want the foundation pattern to show through. Sometimes the long bushes just hide too much, and I just prefer to have that peeking through at times. And in this part of the landscaping, I'm doing my usual pattern where I put the low-lying bushes as the front border, then I put medium height bushes or flowers in the center, and then I put the tallest plants in the back. And then I just choose the plants based on the color palette that I'm going with for the garden. And the flowers that I've chosen for this garden are the yellow daisies and the pink foxglove, which both can be found in the Cottage Living debug menu. Another pack that I really like is the Romantic Garden pack, and that is where I pulled these hollyhocks from. The pack does have some wild colors, which can be fun, but they also have some great neutrals as well. So I added those in here, as well as these bushes that are from the Cottage Living debug. The flowers remind me of jasmine, and they're some of my favorite bushes to use in the game. And that's the build. Thank you so much for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed this pumpkin farm, and the lot is available on the gallery if you'd like to download it. And with that, I'll see you in the next one.